You walk into a room and something shifts before anyone speaks. Not the lighting, not the temperature. Something in the architecture of your own attention. You scan the space automatically, not for exits, but for coordinates. Who's here? What are they wearing? What are they carrying? What version of success is on display? And before you've even taken off your coat, you've already placed yourself on a map you never agreed to. You're not just in the room, you're in the hierarchy, you're in the comparison, you're in the silent calculation of where you stand versus where you should be standing. And the should, that's the clue. That's the fingerprint. Because that should doesn't belong to you. It belongs to someone else. Someone you've been chasing. Someone who already left that version of themselves behind. This is the first layer, the surface observation. You think you're ambitious. You think you're driven. But what you're actually doing is maintaining a gap. A specific, measurable distance between your life and the life you've been told represents arrival. The problem isn't the gap. The problem is that the life on the other side of the gap isn't stationary. It's not a finish line. It's a moving target. And the people you're chasing? They're not there anymore. They've already outgrown the version of success you're trying to copy. While you're memorizing their old blueprint, they're drawing new ones. While you're building their past, they're living their future. And you're stuck in a temporal loop, chasing a ghost of a life that was already abandoned. Let's go deeper. The pattern recognition. You don't just want what they have. You want the version of yourself that you believe would be worthy of what they have. You're not chasing wealth. You're chasing the identity that wealth promises. The feeling of being insulated from judgment. The feeling of having enough buffer that you can finally stop calculating. The feeling of arriving at a psychological address where the rent is paid in full and the eviction notices stop coming. But that address, they moved out of it years ago because they discovered something you haven't yet. That the insulation doesn't come from the external marker. It comes from outgrowing the need for the marker at all. They're not rich because they have the life you want. They're rich because they've already lived the version you're killing yourself to build. And they found it empty. The internal mechanism, your ego doesn't want you to have the life. Your ego wants you to want the life because desire is safe. Desire keeps you oriented outward. Desire keeps the validation streaming in from external coordinates. If you're always chasing, you never have to face the internal question, what would I be if I stopped moving? The ego's primary function here isn't protection from failure. It's protection from stillness, because stillness is where the identity instability lives. Stillness is where you'd have to sit with the version of you that isn't defined by the chase. And that version is terrifying. Not because it's inadequate, but because it's unknown. The ego would rather have you be a known quantity in a borrowed identity than an unknown quantity in your own. Now the identity implication, every time you achieve one of their old milestones, you don't feel satisfaction. You feel a flicker of confusion. A subtle disorientation, because the achievement was supposed to feel like arrival, but it feels like maintenance. You got the job, the income, the apartment, the watch, but you're still performing the same internal calculations. The buffer didn't appear, the insulation didn't arrive, the judgment didn't stop. So you assume you must not have enough yet. You must need the next thing, the bigger thing, the thing they have now. But they're not chasing the next thing anymore. They're chasing something internal, something you can't see, something that doesn't photograph well. They're chasing a feeling of alignment that no longer requires external proof, and you're still collecting proof for a case that was dismissed years ago. Scenario 1. You're texting a friend about weekend plans. They suggest a restaurant you've been wanting to try. You look it up. The prices are fine. For them, for you, it's a calculation. Not just can you afford it, but should you? Should you be spending that? Should you be the kind of person who drops that much on a meal without thinking? And in that moment, you're not deciding based on your own values. You're calculating based on the life you think you're supposed to be living. You're asking, does this match the identity I'm chasing? You end up suggesting a different place. Cheaper, more your speed. Your friend agrees. The night is fine, but you've just reinforced a pattern. You've just told your nervous system that your current level is where you belong. That the other life, the one they outgrew, is still above you, still something to earn. And every small decision like this is a brick in the wall between you and your own evolution. Mid-retention spike, whose life are you actually living? Because it's not yours. Yours would have moments of aimlessness. Yours would have choices that don't make sense to anyone else. Yours would have internal logic that doesn't translate to status updates. But the life you're chasing, it's a curated feed. It's a highlight reel. It's a life designed to be observed and approved, and the people you're chasing have already learned the cost of that design. They've already felt the hollowness. They've already started tearing it down, and you building it up, brick by brick, wondering why it doesn't feel like home. Shift to a new angle, the architecture of borrowed desire. You didn't choose this life you're chasing. You inherited it. You downloaded it. You absorbed it through osmosis from a culture that sells identities the way it sells vitamins, as supplements for a deficiency you didn't know you had. The deficiency is the gap between you and the rich. But the rich don't feel rich. They feel the next gap, the gap between them and the fulfilled, the gap between them and the free, the gap between them and the ones who no longer need to chase. And you're chasing their old shell, their discarded skin, the exoskeleton they shed when they outgrew the belief that more is the answer. Surface observation, you collect symbols. The car, the title, the zip code. You think these are the building blocks of the life, but they're not blocks, they're breadcrumbs. They're the trail left behind by someone moving through a forest you can't see. And you're following the breadcrumbs, thinking if you collect enough, you'll find the house. But the house was never at the end of the trail. The house was the starting point. The person who left those breadcrumbs, they built the house, lived in it, realized it was a prison, and walked out into the forest to find what was real. And you're arriving at the prison, decorating the cell, wondering why you still feel caged. Pattern recognition, you mistake acquisition for arrival. You think the moment you get the thing, you'll become the person. But the person you're trying to become already knows the thing won't help. That's why they're not attached to it anymore. They've already seen that the identity you're chasing is a costume that doesn't fit anyone for long. They've already felt the chafing. They've already taken it off. And you're in the dressing room, pulling it on, adjusting the shoulders, thinking if you just get the right tailor, it'll finally feel like you. Internal mechanism. Your nervous system is running a delay. It's processing the present through the lens of a past that doesn't exist anymore. The rich you're chasing aren't there. They're not in that house. They're not driving that car. They're not posting those photos. They've moved on to questions you haven't even thought to ask yet. Questions like, what do I do with the space that money was supposed to fill? What do I become when becoming is no longer driven by lack? Who am I when I'm not defined by what I have or what I want? And you're still stuck on the first question, how do I get what they have? You're solving a problem they've already dissolved. Identity implication, you're living in psychological debt, you're borrowing against a future self who you believe will finally be free. But every purchase you make on credit, every decision you make from not enough yet, accrues interest. The interest is your life. The interest is the present moment which you keep signing away to a future that never arrives. The rich outgrew this debt structure. They paid it off, not with money, but with awareness. They realized the debt was imaginary, that the lender was a ghost, that the interest was just life passing by while you waited for clearance to live it. And you're still making payments. thinking you're being responsible, not realizing you're funding your own imprisonment. Scenario 2, you're at a dinner party. Someone asks what you do. You give your title. You name your company. You watch their eyes for flickers of recognition, respect, envy. You've learned to modulate your answer based on the audience. For some, you lead with the prestige. For others, you downplay it, to seem humble, to seem like you're not one of those people. But either way, you're not answering the question. You're positioning yourself on the map. You're locating yourself relative to the life you're chasing. And the person you're talking to, they're doing the same thing. They're measuring, they're calculating, and neither of you is actually present. You're both ghosts, haunting the same abandoned mansion of an identity, pretending it's still occupied. Mid-retention spike. What if making it is just the moment you realize you've been chasing a life that was never meant to be lived twice? What if the rich aren't ahead of you? They're just on a different timeline. They've already played the level you're stuck on. They've already collected the coins, fought the boss, unlocked the achievement, and they found out it's just a game. And you're still playing, thinking if you just get the high score, you'll finally feel like you won. But they're not playing anymore. They're building something that doesn't have a scoreboard. Shift again, the ghost of the future you. You're not just chasing their life. You're chasing the version of you that you think would be worthy of their life. You're building a future self based on outdated specs. You're constructing a person who will finally be happy when they have the thing. But the person who will have the thing is not the person who wants the thing. The wanting self is the current self. The having self is a future self who will look back at you with pity because they'll know what you don't yet, that the thing doesn't satisfy the want. The want is the problem. The want is the gap. And the gap is the product. The rich outgrew the product. You're still buying it. Surface observation. You have a mental image of your future self. They're calm. They're decisive. They're surrounded by the symbols. But you can't see their internal state. You can't see the moment they realized the symbols were empty. You can't see the crisis they had when they understood that the life you're chasing was the life they needed to leave to become who they are now. You're chasing their past, thinking it's your future. You're orbiting a star that already burned out. And you're wondering why you feel cold. Pattern recognition. The future self you're building is a projection, not a prediction. It's a fantasy compiled from fragments of other people's highlight reels. It has no internal consistency. It's not a real person. It's a mood board. And you're trying to live inside a mood board. The rich outgrew the mood board. They realized it was a collage, not a blueprint. They started building from their own sketches. And you're still trying to match the collage, wondering why the pieces don't fit. Internal mechanism. This is temporal displacement as ego protection. By living in the future, you avoid the present. By chasing their past, you avoid your own becoming. The ego keeps you in a state of perpetual arrival, because arrival is where the evaluation happens. Arrival is where you'd have to face the question, was this worth it? And the ego can't risk that question, because the answer might be no. So it keeps the arrival always just ahead, always one more milestone away, always their old life, which you can never catch because they're not living it anymore. Identity implication. You're not just living someone else's outgrown life. You're living your own unlived life projected onto their discarded shell. You have desires that don't fit the template. You have impulses that don't match the blueprint. You have a sense of what would actually feel meaningful that has nothing to do with what you're chasing, but you ignore it. You call it impractical. You call it naive. You call it a distraction from the real work of building the life. But the life you're building is the distraction. The real work is the ignored impulse. The real work is the desire you've been trained to see as a defect. Scenario 3. You hit a goal. The number in your account, the title on your LinkedIn, the address you can now use. You expected a feeling, a specific feeling, the one you've been chasing. But what arrives is something else, a quiet, a flatness, a sense of, okay, now what? And you panic. Not because you failed, but because you succeeded and it didn't feel like you thought it would. So you immediately set a new goal, a bigger number, a better title, a more impressive address. You don't sit with the flatness. You don't question the template. You assume the template is right and your feeling is wrong. You're chasing their life, but you're also chasing the feeling you think they must have. But they don't have it. They outgrew it. They're chasing something you can't see. Mid-retention spike. What if the feeling you're chasing isn't satisfaction? What if it's permission to stop? Permission to be. Permission to outgrow the chase itself. And what if the rich got rich not by getting more, but by realizing they didn't need permission from anyone, including their own ego, to stop performing the life they were supposed to want? Shift to social dynamics. You're not chasing alone. You're part of a collective hallucination, a shared dream of what the good life looks like. And the rich are the dream's former authors. They wrote the first draft, lived it, realized it was a rough draft, and started revising. But you're still reading the first draft like it's scripture. You're still quoting lines they've already deleted. You're still building scenes they've already cut. And the social matrix reinforces this. Every post, every comment, every subtle nod of approval when you name the right symbols, it's all a feedback loop keeping you locked in their past. Surface observation. You mirror their desires because you think that's how you become them. But mirroring is not becoming. Mirroring is mimicry, and mimicry is a form of tribute, not transformation. You're paying homage to a god they've already dethroned. You're worshiping at the altar of a religion they've already left. And the congregation is full of people just like you, all chanting the same prayers, all wondering why they still feel empty. Pattern recognition. The collective hallucination has rules. You can't just want money. You have to want it in the right way. You have to want it for the right reasons. You have to package your ambition in the language of self-improvement, of legacy, of impact. But underneath, it's the same chase, the same borrowed life, the same outdated map. And the rich have already seen through the packaging. They've already opened the box and found it empty. They're not selling the product anymore. They're selling the escape from the product. And you're still buying the product. Internal mechanism, social validation creates false needs. You don't just want the life. You want to be seen wanting the life. You want to be seen getting the life. You want the story, the narrative arc, the before and after. But the after you're imagining is their before, and the story you're writing is a sequel to a book they've already closed. The validation you're seeking is from an audience that's already moved on to a different genre. Identity implication. Yourself fragments in this marketplace. You become a brand, a persona, a curated feed of highlights that tell the story you think you should be living. But the story is theirs. The highlights are theirs. The metrics are theirs. Your identity is a franchise of their original. And franchises never have the creative freedom of the original. They never get to deviate from the formula. They never get to surprise the audience. They just replicate. And replication is not living. It's remembrance. You're remembering a life they've already forgotten. Scenario 4. You see someone who made it. The version you're chasing. They're at the event, wearing the clothes, driving the car. But you catch a moment. A flicker. A glance at their phone that lasts too long. A laugh that sounds slightly too sharp. A pause before they answer, "How are you?" with "Great, everything's great." And you see it. The same flatness you felt when you hit your goal. The same quiet. The same Okay, now what? And in that moment you realize they're not ahead. They're just on a different loop. They're not happy. They're just performing the happiness you're supposed to feel when you get the thing. They're not living the life. They're maintaining the brand. And you're chasing their maintenance, mid-retention spike. What if the life you're chasing is just a performance of a life that was never actually lived? What if the rich are just better actors in the same play you're trying to audition for? And what if the play is closing? Shift to awareness gap, you know this. Intellectually, you know it. You've seen the interviews, you've read the articles, you know that money doesn't buy happiness. You know that external validation is a trap. You know that comparison is the thief of joy. You know all the quotes, but knowing doesn't close the gap. Because the gap isn't intellectual, it's somatic, it's in your nervous system. It's in the way your body responds to the symbols. It's in the way your chest tightens when you see the car, the house, the title. It's in the way your stomach drops when you calculate the distance. The awareness is there. But the integration is missing. Surface observation. You can explain the pattern to your therapist. You can name the mechanisms. You can trace it back to childhood, to culture, to capitalism. You can see it with perfect clarity. And yet you still scroll. You still compare. You still chase. Because the part of you that knows is not the part of you that wants. The knowing self is a spectator. The wanting self is the actor. And the actor is following a script written by someone who's already left the production. Pattern recognition, the awareness gap is maintained by the ego because integration would mean the end of the chase. And the end of the chase would mean facing the question, who am I if I'm not trying to be them? Who am I if I'm not closing the gap? Who am I if I'm not aspiring to a life that's already been outgrown? The ego can't answer that. The ego's job is to keep the question unasked. So it lets you have awareness without integration. It lets you know without changing. It gives you the satisfaction of insight while keeping you locked in the pattern. Because insight is safe. Insight is controlled. Insight doesn't require you to stop. Internal mechanism, the ego maintains the gap by creating a false hierarchy of self. There's the you that knows better, the wise observing you, and there's the you that can't stop, the compulsive chasing you. And the ego tells you these are two different people, that the wise you will eventually save the chasing you, that one day you'll know enough to stop. But that's the trap. The wise you and the chasing you are the same person. The gap is the illusion. The integration isn't about one part saving the other. It's about recognizing they were never separate. The chase is the wisdom. The wisdom is the chase. They're both responses to the same wound, the belief that you are not enough as you are. Identity implication, living in the awareness gap creates a specific kind of exhaustion. The exhaustion of being two people at once. The exhaustion of holding the map and walking the path at the same time, constantly comparing the terrain to the drawing, constantly noting the discrepancies. You're the cartographer and the traveler, and neither role lets you actually experience the journey. You're too busy documenting it, and the documentation is always about someone else's route. Final scenario, you're alone, no audience, no comparison, and you feel a desire, a quiet, simple desire, to take a walk, to read a book, to cook a meal that no one will photograph, to do something that has no ROI, no status, no story, and you feel the ego panic. This is a waste. This won't get you closer. This isn't part of the plan. And for the first time, you see it clearly. The plan was never your plan. The plan was their old plan. The plan was the life they already outgrew. And you've been following it like a script, thinking it was your destiny. But destiny isn't a script, it's an improvisation. And improvisation requires you to stop chasing the life they already left and start living the one that's actually yours. Mid-retention spike. What if the only way to win the game is to realize you're playing a game someone else already quit? What if the finish line is just the starting line of a race no one's running anymore? The confidence you perform is still owned by who you were. The life you chase is still owned by who they were. And the moment you see that, really see it, not just know it, is the moment you stop performing and start living. Not their life. Not the outgrown version, not the discarded shell, but the one that's been waiting. The one that's been patient. The one that's been watching you chase ghosts and has been ready this whole time to finally be real.